I am joined today on Between the Levees by Mary McCarthy, the Director of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility for Moran Towing. She is also the co-founder of a little group called Admiralty, which we will discuss in this conversation. Mary, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, Tim, thank you so much. What an honor. You just keep racking up all the cool people in the industry, and I'm very honored to be asked to join.
Well, I was told you are sort of this generation's river legend, so we'll find out how that happened. First of
Yeah,
all,
suspect accusation right there, but
that's okay. We'll take it. So, where were you born and what eventually led you to the industry?
I grew up in Northern Virginia in the DC suburbs. My dad worked for a newspaper in Washington, DC. I was born in Dallas, but my family only spent a small time there. My family's from Oklahoma. So my older brother was born in Oklahoma. Me and my younger brother born in Dallas during a very brief stopover before kind of my dad uh, moved to DC with my mom and kind of made his career. So really an Oklahoman at heart, but raised in Northern Virginia.
Did your mother work?
She did. Both my parents were editors. So if you think that my Admiralty emails have great grammar, it's because of them. They're both editors and reporters and editors. That's kind of how they met at University of Oklahoma in the journalism school, and that's what they both did their careers, made their careers pretty much. So I have, like I said, two brothers, one older, one younger, and I'll be honest that I really fell into the industry by accident. I answered a classified ad and that was, in the newspaper. I was sitting on a bus circling the classified ads, like you see in the movies back in 2006. So I was very lucky to happen upon the industry and meet so many people who are family legacies. And that's why I think it's just fascinating to learn about all these family companies. And that's another thing I really appreciate about your podcast. I've learned a lot about the family companies along the way.
Well, were you drawn at all to journalism? Was there any drive toward that?
Great question. Yeah, I was like, oh, this seems easy. It was not easy. I had an internship at our little local paper in Vienna, Virginia, and I was terrible at it. I was so bad. I didn't have the personality to just walk up to people and start interviewing them and asking them questions, that like news hound instinct that you need. I did not have that. And so I kind of was surprised that it was definitely something I did not like. So I was a history major in college just because I liked it, thought it was interesting. I feel like we have a similar interest in history. And so that's kind of what I ended up, the only career I knew in my family was really journalism, and then didn't want to do that. And so just started applying for places. I had an internship my senior year of college as a public affairs assistant at a small nonprofit in DC that did like smart growth, more like transit, like, smart growth in cities with transit hubs and buses and trains and that kind of thing. Since I went to college at University of Mary Washington, which is just about an hour south of DC. So 2 days a week I went up there. And so I had this like 6 months of writing press releases and updating the website, and it's pre-social media mostly, so I didn't even do that element of it very much, but I at least had enough to start looking for other public affairs assistant jobs that were permanent. This internship was kind of an extended internship. So that summer after college, I lived at home and took a bus to the metro to this internship and was just applying for jobs all summer. And fortunately for me, American Waterways Operators was one of the folks who gave me a chance with an interview. So Ann Burns, who was the VP of Public Affairs at the time, brought me in, and she lived in Vienna. We had a lot in common, and she decided to give me a shot. Her and Tom Allegretti both, I interviewed with them both. And so I owe a lot to both of them because it seemed as a 22-year-old to have an actual office with a door and to be able to go to cool places like Seattle and Boston and San Diego and Chicago and New Orleans, Miami, all the big port cities. That was a dream for me. So I got very lucky that even though I wasn't kind of raison deck or anything like that. I got into it pretty early and was able to realize what a great industry it is.
Did your siblings follow your parents into the journalism industry?
No, they're both really technically minded. My older brother, but they're both, we all have great grammar, so that helps. My older brother ended up moving out, got an engineering degree. They both went to Virginia Tech. My older brother got an engineering degree and ended up moving to San Francisco and really got into tech, and now works for Credit Karma. Before he worked for Patreon. So he's kind of a project engineer. He kind of brings together the engineers and sales folks. And so he has that kind of right brain, left brain, which is very coveted, that I did not quite get that great balance. My younger brother's an accountant, works for JP Morgan, still lives in the DC area. So he's my personal financial consultant, which I appreciate his help with. So we all ended up in different kind of stuff and all kind of scattered. But we all have like to catch up with each other over holidays because all of us work in such different industries. It's really fascinating.
Well, before we get into your beginnings with AWO, tell me a little bit about growing up. Anything interesting happened to you? Any interesting episodes in school or extracurricular activities?
The only one worth mentioning, because I had a very pleasant but not terribly exciting suburban upbringing, was I was a big swimmer. I was on the swim team. I was a lifeguard. I taught swim lessons, taught little kids, and was at the pool all the time. And we kind of neighborhood pool, so I was just there, swim in high school. So I don't know. The only connection I had to the water is that I like swimming, so it's really a stretch. It's my only link to the maritime industry, but I get maybe that kind of helped me a little bit really realize that this was a great industry and to kind of stick with it.
Tell me a little bit about your career with AWO, and I guess any stories that come to mind about these maybe revelatory moments when you said, "Wow, this is where I want to be."
Oh, that's a good question. These are such good questions. So,
if I may interject one more time, you said you don't like coming up to people and asking questions. I do. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah. Made me choke with laughter. Different strokes. So I got into AWO in an awesome time. Right. I had I had 4 different jobs, I think 3 or 4 jobs in 4 years in terms of just opportunities for promotions and changes in jobs. So I got to really get a lot of experience quickly when I was young in the industry. So I started 2006, and then the following year we reorganized. So we created these issue-specific positions. So it was all, advocate. AWO, American Waterways Operators, is the National Trade Association for the towboat and barge industry. And so instead of having, we ended up deciding that like, hey, these big issues are everywhere. And so let's have these kind of issue specific, they call them government affairs associates, which they still have. And so regardless of which kind of upper level management person, be it the vice president out in Seattle or the lobbyist there in DC or, Lynn Munch in St. Louis or whatever that issue is, they would tap you. And so you got to work on these really interesting issues, which I think all of our issues are very interesting. Our industry punches above its weight. We're mostly bipartisan in the way that I like. In DC, a lot of folks have jobs that are one or the other in terms of political parties, and our issues, we were talking to everybody, which I really liked. And so that shift away from kind of the person who put out the newsletter every other week as a public affairs assistant, which was great and a great way to learn what we had going on, to being, kind of an issue expert that supported our executive team, that was huge. And I guess I was the only one that kind of in that shift stuck around. I don't think I had any revelations besides everyone was just all the members. AWO, mostly the folks who I met initially were kind of the executives. I know on your podcast, you really interview people it's such a diverse industry. You've got executives, you've got dispatchers, you've got mariners, and everybody. Most of the people I was interacting with first were at the executive level. And so, but most of them, it was their family companies. So I do remember Tom Allegretti specifically being very much a stickler when I was, making name tags or doing my job, that all the company names had to be right. And it took me a little while to realize that he's spot on, because those are people's family names. I mean, you can't mess them up. So it's not a good look. So that really imparted on me a lot that, hey, like, yes, this person may be a president of a company, but it's his family company. I know a lot of his family members now, just through their participation. And also, I learned quickly about the 24/7 nature of the industry, which you're calling people to just, reach out about an issue or whatever, and they're fly fishing. They're at a wedding, whatever, but they always picked up. And I just thought, as a 22-year-old, I thought those, and they were happy to talk to you. New Year's Eve, I was calling people with a particularly sticky Asian carp issue that Lynn Munch and I worked late into one New Year's Eve. And I'm calling people like 9 p.m. They're at a party, I could tell in the background, and they are happy to talk to me and give me what I need. So that was kind of what really hooked me, that everything these people did was interesting. They were all super nice and supportive and willing to teach someone who didn't know anything about the industry. They weren't like, oh, you don't know anything, we don't respect you. It was, hey, come on, learn. And that they just worked really hard. And so I think that was, maybe some of the things that led me to stick around. And so then, as other government affairs associates were hired, I was kind of the senior person, even though I'd only been there a year or two. So I got to kind of help them and really get to learn a lot in that transition. So I can't say enough good things about working there. For sure, it was a great first job. As good as you can get. The only issue is no operational. You're not really involved in any operations, and that's the biggest thing that we do. So that is what I've been trying to focus on a lot of the rest of my career. But you got to start somewhere. You're not going to be well-rounded, after your first job.
Now, I think I have an idea what this answer might be, but did you have a favorite port city to visit? And if so, why?
Oh, New Orleans. So I ended up moving here after going to like 3 meetings or conferences down here, and just decided I needed to live here. So luckily it ended up being better than just, what I saw on these work visits, which, I got to get out on some boats. Tim Morton brought me out on a boat. I think that's the only time I got on a boat down here before I moved. And it just seemed like a really cool city to a 26-year-old. Post Katrina, a lot going on, a lot of young people here. And I didn't have a job when I moved here, but I hoped that with just it being a maritime center of the country, that I would hopefully get one. So it was a gamble, and lucky it paid off.
Aside from New Orleans, what was the most scenic port city you've been to, maybe? And are there any interesting memories or surprises about visiting?
That is a great question. My instinct when you said that was maybe Seattle. That was my first port city that I went to. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and it's just beautiful. And the people are great, and the maritime industry is more diverse there than I think a lot of people realize. So I think it's a hidden gem in terms of our industry. It's not just the end of the line, which is how I think we line haul towboaters who are based down here may think of it. Baltimore, grew up going to Orioles games in the Inner Harbor right there. It's like New Orleans and New York and other cities that if you're spending time in the city, you're looking at tugboats. So those would probably be my top ones. What about you? Do you have a favorite?
I've only seen New Orleans, as a matter of fact.
Okay, well, we got to get you out. Okay, that's
pretty limited. So
yeah.
Looking forward a little bit. So you're 26, you moved to New Orleans to party a little bit, maybe to find a job. What led you eventually to an 11-year stint with Canal Barge?
When I moved down for grad school. I kind of had decided that I wanted to do public administration. I liked the policy stuff at AWO enough and the issues, and I'm not partisan. Political science is not really my thing. That's a lot of people's things in DC, and it wasn't my thing. So I knew I would probably only, get so far, and it wasn't as interesting to me. But public administration is really about implementing what the legislators and the people decide we need to do. So the stickiness of, okay, we wrote this bill, or we said we need to do this. Now, how does it get done, and how do you measure it? Which is really real life, I thought. So, it was interestingly complex to me. So, I decided to go to the grad program, MPA grad program at UNO, up the street here. And I had no money. I spent all my money on rent because I lived in downtown DC on Capitol Hill. So I spent 80% of my paycheck on rent, which you're not supposed to do. But I had a great 4 years in DC, living with my girlfriends and having fun. And so I needed the student loan. So I couldn't have just moved. I didn't have the money to just move. So I did also what you're not supposed to do, and just go all in on student loans and hope for the best. And live off them. But I had messaged some folks in the industry, just let them know I was coming down, would love to pick their brains, about New Orleans and everything. And Tom Smith, my very long time boss at Canal, I remember him texting me and saying, heard you were moving down, would love to set up, an interview to see if we could work together. And again, just all the credit to Tom. He hired me 4 days a week, part-time, said, you moved here for school, do your school. But if 4 days a week works for you, it works for us. So it's kind of perfect amount of time, enough to not just be a part-time or a 2 day a week or at Canal, but also not fail out of grad school and have nothing to show for all my loans. So, and kind of work hourly. So work when you can, but if you can't, then you're off the clock. So I did that for 3 years. And I also just, credit to Tom, and also to what a great company that Canal is. I got in at a great time with them because they were expanding. When I started at Canal in 2010, our employee count was just under 500. And then when I left in 2021, it was almost 900. So increased a lot. I don't know the boat count equivalent to that, but did some building, did some buying, and just did some, right sizing of shoreside folks for support, just with the more mariners. And so there was a lot going on at Canal, and a lot of new regulations, including Subchapter M, which I ended up kind of working on for several years there. So it was pretty obvious that it was a cool place to be, that was diverse and dynamic and growing. And so I was appreciative that they let me, I was lucky that I knew I had a job after grad school, which I was not expecting. That was really great to have.
How long did grad school take?
3 years. And, after 2 years, Canal was like, hey, when you're done, if you're interested, let's do full time. And I was full in. So that last year was tough when you have a job. You're like, okay, why am I writing this 30-page paper? But you got to do it. You just got to finish. And I tried to do my papers on topics relevant to our industry, so I could kind of, go back and forth a little bit, which helped some keep my motivation high.
Well, walk me through your career with Canal.
Man, it started off, I did the newsletter, and I had three main things: the newsletter, our business continuity plan, which this was 5 years after Katrina. So the business continuity plan used to be the hurricane plan, was really a huge thing that had a lot of focus of everyone in the company, a lot of lessons learned from Katrina in it, and a lot of continued interest in it. And so that was, and just as a New Orleanian, that was a great project for me because I got to kind of learn about how companies who are 24/7 handled all their people scattered, and kind of, especially when technology wasn't as advanced as it was even in 2010 and now. And then the tank barge vessel response plan regulations were the salvage and marine firefighting portion of those regulations was getting finalized. We had to sign contracts with salvage and marine firefighting providers and update our VRPs and all that. So I kind of learned the tank barge side, which is fascinating, and got to learn kind of the corporate side with the business continuity plan, how all that was handled. the newsletter, which is always great because you talk to a bunch of different departments. And Sub M was kind of out there as coming at some point. So kind of watching that. So it was great to have those kind of projects at first, and they kind of grew with the vessel response plan regulations. Then the non-tank vessel response plan regulations came about. So some of our towboats were looped into those. I kind of passed off the newsletter to a growing social media team, which, all companies were beefing that area up. And obviously Sub M continued business continuity and kind of organizational operation type stuff. And then Sub M became, the big elephant that we were all trying to take bites of at one time. So that is kind of everything just kind of continued to grow. And we just had a lot of young people who, I feel like there weren't a whole lot of young people when I started. There were a few that stayed around for a long time, but a lot got hired in my class almost. That was kind of one of the reasons that I was interested in founding Admiralty, and ended up talking to the co-founders, Tim and Alyssa, about it, because some people, I felt like the young folks in the organization they were working for Canal, they weren't working for the industry. And I came from the opposite direction. And I was like, and Hannah Shotan, now McGowan, was my coworker, and fortunately took me under her wing and helped me kind of learn about New Orleans and learn about the industry and learn about the company. Shotan is obviously I have a book about their family here. They're a longtime towboat family that Kirby ended up purchasing in the 90s. And a lot of folks in the industry, I know Z Dave and Frank and the other folks on your podcast reference Shotan. And so people will come up to me who I knew from AWO and be like, we heard there's a Shotan at your company. Like, is it he? Is it she? Where are they? Can you bring that? Like, and she, had a connection to the industry, but didn't realize how many people knew her family and had met her when she was young. And so that was also kind of the impetus for Admiralty kind of early on at Canal, realizing that we have some young people who, would maybe be interested in being connected to the industry kind of writ large.
Well, for the non-mariner or non-marine industry viewer, explain a little bit about what Sub M is.
Oh my gosh, so hard. Sub M, inspection of towing vessels. So something that we've kind of battled for a long time as an industry is that towing vessels were not inspected. Were they regulated? Yes. And Mike Rushing, RIP, created a great book of towboat regulations that was huge. So anytime I would hear that, I would pull out my Rushing book and say, these are, we are regulated, and the Coast Guard can get on our boats at any time. But that uninspected label, because we didn't have annual Coast Guard boots on deck, making sure everything looked good, like tank barges had, ferries, and other vessel classes, it kind of left us susceptible to that negative stigma. And also, if you just look at the history of regulations, most of them come about after a major incident, often rightly so. But then there's a huge push for it, and it's really hard to get the details right when it is in the public eye and being clamored for and on a timeline. So the industry did something that I don't know of really happening very often anywhere else, and we asked to be inspected. So AWO went to Congress, and in like the early 2000s, got towing vessel inspection inserted into probably the Coast Guard authorization bill. I don't remember which one anymore. And so it, mandated that the Coast Guard inspect us, but we were all for it. And we already had the RCP since like 1990. So we had an awesome voluntary standard for policies that was specific to towboats, so that we have been using for 10 years. So we were like, this is great. We basically already started. Here you go. And hey, regulators, if we want to not just have it be boots on deck checklist, focus on engine room wheelhouse. If you wanted to actually focus on the people, which we all know from incident investigations is really the main factor, human factors are the main factors behind incidents. All these policies and procedures to make sure we're operating correctly as a company and supporting our mariners, making sure they're trained and healthy and alert and compliant with the work rest hours and all that. this is really the way you do it. Don't lose all the checklists and make sure the boat, is seaworthy, but there's also this other piece. And so other people were on the front lines of that. I came in to AWO in the middle of that, but it wasn't, other folks were working on it. So I kind of heard about it, but it had already started. And then just kind of took a long time for the rulemaking to be finalized. But once it did, it was game on. And companies who voluntarily did stuff for a long time were ahead of the game, and it was not a huge sea change, but it was still work to make sure that you were doing what you needed to do. And so again, I feel like that was a great project because it really got me working, especially with our port engineering team, who's amazing. And I was in their area of the office and working with them the most, because the policies we had the policies, we're implementing them, we're already being audited all the time. But the engineering piece was the area I had the least experience in, and that's the area that took more time to change, obviously. And I know Ingram is the same way. You don't have one type of towboat. You don't have 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 of the same types of towboats. You have all different classes and ages and what's on what. And so that really taught me a lot about actual, the engineering, mechanical, electrical components of towboats. So that helped a lot with kind of filling that gap in my operational knowledge.
Next, I guess, tell me a little bit about the origins and the advent of your Admiralty program.
Oh, this is the best part. Admiralty is the best. 10 years this month. Can't believe it. So, I hope Alyssa does do your podcast. So if she's listening, or other people are listening, ping her about it, because, and me and Tim have talked about it, but I think my recollection is that we were at like the Westin Hotel for some AWO conference, and between the three of us, it was just a natural conversation. So I can't even remember. I think it was just, hey, let's do a happy hour. Let's all chat. And like, hey, I know some people we can add. And I did have this desire to like, hey, I'm going to bring some of my coworkers who don't realize that this is a big industry. That think it's just a good New Orleans company, but they don't realize it's the tip of the spear here, or tip of the iceberg, I guess. And in DC, there's all these young people in X happy hour groups to network. So I went to young people in transportation, but it was all transit people, which is interesting, but not freight. And then I went to young people in energy, which we have a chapter in New Orleans that I want to intersect with. But my friends who worked at the Department of Energy would go there, and there's no one in transportation. So I never really found a home, but I thought it was a great idea because there's a lot of, people just being able to chat and learn about their community. And so I had that kind of model and in my head of something that was easy, of just here's a place and a time, pay your own way, show up if you want to. And that's honestly literally the easiest model to manage, and it has worked so far. So, which has been very nice that people have been interested in 10 years, continuously, to just be able to meet up and chat in kind of informal setting. We're fortunate in New Orleans. We have all these amazing groups, and they all fill a different need, which is great. This one is a good one to get folks in the door, especially young people who maybe don't have $100 for dues to the Propeller Club or something. They may be just starting out and, don't maybe intimidated to ask their boss for to expense that. I know I was. And it's a way for them to start networking and kind of get that foot in the door. And I know people who have gotten jobs out of Admiralty. I know people who have gotten married because of Admiralty. So it's ended up being better than any of us could have ever expected, while also being the same amount of ease to plan. And I would say that once people stop showing up, I'll stop sending out the emails. But until then, it's kind of like this podcast. It really does remind me of your podcast, because it's like you're kind of doing the hustle with job, and you're trying to learn new stuff and, navigate. And then you just pick and do something on your own time that you're just interested in. And it's like, boom, like way more immediate positive feedback than you'd ever get in any other arena. Just not, just because it's something that you're doing that because you're interested in it, it's very authentic. And so I feel that way about your podcast. I don't know if you feel that way, but just that it's exploded.
Well, it's been a very interesting and surprisingly well received little project. Certainly a lot more to people than I knew, and it's been most interesting to me to find all the origin stories that converge on this one
Yeah.
industry that nobody knows about, that I didn't. I grew up right outside New Orleans. I mean, I saw ship stacks passing over the levee, but I never really knew anything about that. But before we get into any more of that, what prompted your transition to turn services? And well, actually, before we go there, was Sub M your focus for the duration of your time at Canal?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So the final COIs, yeah, for the duration. I left Canal before all of our boats got COIs, but I think 50% had COIs. So I remember submitting our comments on the notice of proposed rulemaking to Sub M in 2011, which is a year after I joined Canal, and then we got our TISMA certificate in 2018. And I was also just super fortunate. My boss after Tom Smith retired was Joe Tyson, and he's a senior vice president of operations. And he was the chair of the AWO Responsible Carrier Program Standards Board. And as part of this process of RCP and Sub M kind of meshing, there was a lot of work to be done. And so he very generously kind of pulled me in on that work, which he needed help on, and I was happy to do it. And I was very, very familiar with RCP, so it kind of worked out and just gave me a front row seat to kind of the sausage making behind it, and just really gave me a lot of knowledge and then kind of confidence in that knowledge. I just, overall, not being a mariner or being, in operations or going to a maritime academy, that's constantly, what I'm trying to make sure that I don't make mistakes because I haven't been on board more than just a couple days at a time. So doing that, working with port captains, port engineers, and then working with the whole industry, to answer questions and standing up at conferences and, really working on this with people for years, really helped accelerate that, again, filling that gap. So that was kind of really my biggest project for sure. As well as kind of at the end of Canal, I really got into incident response, which is another great way to learn about the operations, because every call you get is different, and the kind of calls that you can get. No two the same, and always something to try to figure out. So between those two, I'll never say that I'm a mariner or that I have an operational background necessarily, but it's also just the most interesting part of the business. That's where it's happening. That's watching the stacks go by and stuff. That's the coolest stuff. So, and I'm going to cut you off from your next question to say something about this podcast. What I like about it is also like a, record, like it's, Library of Congress, like records people's stories. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a book called Between the Levees that Steve Golding's wife, Melody, produced. She's a photographer, and she did photographs and wrote like kind of 1 or 2 page vignettes and interviewed a bunch of mariners. And I'm looking this way because it's in a box right there. And so I think it's interesting that you picked this name because her take was very exactly the same as yours. Is Between the Levees. That's really where the action is, and it's hidden from 99% of the population. And we need to capture these stories. So she has her first mariners that she interviewed in the book, were in their 80s or 90s and then passed away shortly thereafter. And those stories need to be told. And I think it behooves us, as the next generation coming online, to look toward the future, but to listen to those people. We're lucky to have so many of them in the industry. People don't leave this industry. So they're all here. They're happy to kind of teach us what they learn and let us skip the line a little bit in terms of learning from them. And so doing it in a podcast form and doing all different kinds of folks, not just mariners, you've kind of evolved the idea without maybe even knowing about it. And that's why I think it's so important. It's a legacy that we'll always have as an amazing resource in this industry.
I had heard about the book, but I did not know the title, so I didn't steal it intentionally.
I don't think it's, I think she'd be fine with it, but you should interview Steve
if you
Golding.
could
I don't know if he's on your list, but he'd be a good
put
one.
put me in touch by
I
all
will.
means. What prompted your transition to turn?
So I really loved working at Canal, and I gotta say, it's one of those jobs that I thought I'd be doing for 3, maybe 5 years, and doubled or tripled that because Canal was so awesome and just gave me so many opportunities. And it's a great company. I mean, everyone knows it's a great company. It's no secret. But I was very fortunate to work there for that long. And really, there really is no reason to leave Canal. It's a great company, and most people don't leave for good reason. But I was kind of interested in getting experience in a different segment of our industry. And Canal's pretty diversified. So I got a lot of experience in inland tanks, hoppers, decks, and towboats, um, ocean going deck barges, fleeting in Chicago. I wasn't really involved in this venture, but um, did some operations down in Colombia on the Magdalena River. Our internal tankermen, we hired tankermen, but also we had our own internal vessel and shore tankermen. So that's its own industry, really, in-house industry, in-house business line. And so I just got a lot of experience in a lot of diverse areas, but at the end of the day, it wasn't shipping, tugs, that kind of stuff. I was kind of interested in, I love brown water, but knew that there was an awesome industry out there, a bigger maritime industry than I had experienced. And I was just interested in seeing that. So it was a super tough decision to leave Canal. But it was kind of like, I don't know, I felt like leave, if I'm even thinking about it, don't, you don't want to leave it too late. So if it is on your mind, and then are you going to be distracting doing your job that you loved for 11 years, but sometimes it's just a change. So I'm basically giving you my exit interview that I gave to Merit because I was like, I can't say anything except for good things. But I was really interested in the opportunity with Turn and appreciated them giving me a shot because I had lived similar to you, lived in New Orleans. Now I'm on my 13th year, but at the time, my 11th year, I didn't really know very much about the harbor or the port at all. With Canal, our boats did come, we had maybe 5 or 6 that would regularly come through, some 6,000s, some 2,000s, but kind of just come in, come out. So I didn't know anything about the port of New Orleans and how it operates. And that's really Turn and then our parent company, Associated Terminals, sweet spot. So, and I was familiar with fleeting, with Turn on the fleeting side, but realizing why Turn and Associated work so well together, it's very synergistic. And learning about dry cargo stevedoring, which I just, really more on the tank barge side. So dry cargo at all, which I know is Ingram's area, more so than Canal's. It was just fascinating, and seeing all these gigantic grain ships come down, or barges come down and load these big grain ships, and just realize that that's how we feed the world, as Gary Poirier, our chairman, Associated Terminals chairman, always says. Was taught me a lot in a short amount of time, and all the boats are right there. I got on a boat probably once a week, and we have crew boats. So you have basically, which, as we all know, any of us who have any experience in crewing, which I got a little bit during COVID, crew boats are not cheap. So if you work for a crew boat company, you get to ride one and jump on with someone else. Use that opportunity because it's not cheap normally. So that was the best part about working there, besides Mario, my boss, another great mentor to me my whole career. Was just the ability to really, and fleet boats are always moving. So there's never, when you go on board, you're not sitting. You're not like you might when, you get on a 6,000 that's waiting on tow, waiting on a fleet boat. And so that means they're easy to catch. So that was huge, just again, and being able to learn a lot in a little bit of time, and just learn that side of the business I didn't know.
What was your role with Turn?
I was vice president of regulatory affairs. So just with the company becoming more active, really doing some of the industry. I was chair of GICA at the time, the Gulf Intercoastal Canal Association, active with kind of AWO safety committees, which are really where the operational folks are, which, is some of the more interesting stuff to my day job. And, I said that it was so great that Turn and Associated are in the harbor. They're right there between New Orleans and Baton Rouge and the mouth of the river, mile marker 50. But that meant Hurricane Ida came ashore during my time there. And so it just hit exactly in our operational area. Like, I know that other companies, line haul, towboat companies, for example, that have employees in Missouri and Arkansas and all that, they could maybe backfill if their folks were impacted and couldn't go back to the boat. All of our folks were impacted. 100% of our people were impacted, of 900 people. So, and chasing them down and trying to get hotel rooms when the hotel rooms didn't have power. And even so, without power, all the linemen were in them so that they could restore our power. And I ended up doing kind of more project-based things like that. That one was kind of forced on us, but other things as well, to just do kind of like business continuity and improvement stuff, which was, again, a great way to learn about the business. But Ida was a tough lesson, but it was a really good one. And we were lucky that we were able to take care of everybody, and, come out stronger for sure. I'm sure it impacted you all, just having your office where it is, in reserve, right? I mean, that was almost ground zero in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. We
Is it better or worse to have a floating office during a hurricane?
Well, there were no issues with the office itself, the triangle office. I was actually at the time working across the street on the in our office building on the land side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then what then prompted to your recent move to Moran towing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was really, I'd only been at Turn for about 2 years, so I wasn't really looking to leave. But I will say personally, I was looking for more opportunities to spend time on the East Coast, where I'm from, where my family is. So just, the parents aging, and my husband and I don't have kids, but my brothers do. So being able to spend more time with my nieces and nephews, and my husband's niece, just was in, again, just one of these things that's just in the back of your mind that you're just thinking about, that's kind of tempering how you view opportunities. So when it kind of came out of the blue, it was something where my ideal world that I didn't think probably existed, that I thought about sometimes, was I'd love to be able to spend part of the time on the East Coast and part of the time in New Orleans. We have a great house. Love it here. It's wonderful, as you know. But the only people I knew who did that were like high-powered lobbyists, very good at their jobs, end of their careers, peak of their Chris Johnson and Jones Walker. Whenever I flew, I saw him, and so I knew he was flying back and forth a lot. And he to me, his life was my dream. He got to have it all. But I did not have his background and experience, and no one would probably sponsor me to do that. So I just didn't really think it was probably possible. But when this opportunity kind of came out of the blue, it was like one of those that, like, okay, this is really in the back of my mind as something I want generally for my life in the future. This is probably it. That Moran has tugs here. We have an office in Letcher. We have a presence in Port Arthur and elsewhere on the Gulf Coast. So it's kind of local. It justifies, me spending a decent amount of time here, and everything like that, while also being able to go back to the East Coast more. Moran is headquartered in Connecticut, but close to New York. When I go up there, that's where my boss is based. When I go up there, I take the train. It's 3-4 hours down to see my family. And a lot of friends in New York who kind of really relocated from DC to New York. So I have a great community there. And so it also afforded me an opportunity to get an experience in an industry I didn't know much about, harbor tugs. I think the first boat I ever got on maybe was an EN tugboat in New Orleans Harbor when I was new to AWO and down here visiting. And Matt Holsouth is now the president of EN He was my coworker at AWO at the time. So just kind of small world stuff from long ago. But other than that, I just didn't have any experience about ship docking, especially on the East Coast. So the opportunity and ATVs, Moran has articulated tug barge units, which I'm very unfamiliar with those. The besides seeing him pass by, you know, in New Orleans. And I've learned that Moran is a very diversified company as well, has a kind of environmental recovery company that's very interesting, that owns a diving company out in Seattle. Sister companies with a Laker company called Interlake in the Great Lakes. So it was one of those things, again, that it was kind of an opportunity to see a broader piece of the industry that, again, I just didn't think I would probably get again. So really a heartbreaker to leave Turn, just felt like too soon, but I think this was probably it. The only, you know, wasn't going to get a better opportunity than this on the personal side. So kind of is what it is, which I really appreciated Mario and the team understanding that. So I have my Turn Services horse here that I keep on my desk since the founder of Associated Terminals, who then, you know, took over Turn Services and brought Frank on board and all that, is a horse lover and owner. So got that on my desk to remind me.
Well, I've been following along sort of on social media that
Oh, okay.
it's lots of travel for you, and I think you're on about 47 different boards. How did you get involved in all that? And I guess, how many is it now?
Yeah, FOMO. I feel like I have FOMO, and I just always am wanting to see what's going on and get involved in it, just because I don't want to miss out. So I don't know. I have a few now. I would say the couple most impactful, and I got to give a shout out to Jason Adams, who used to work at Ingram, who now is at Inland Marine Service. He was really one of my industry mentors, and he put me onto the AWO Safety Committee, which now the kind of governing body is called SLAP, Safety Leadership Advisory Panel, which was an acronym that we came up with. He really, he was the chair at the time, and it was kind of before Sub-M, and the safety committees kind of did their own things off to the side of AWO and were productive, but kind of siloed over to the side, not really integrated. And he advocated for me to be his vice chair, which I really appreciated. He had conversations with my boss and you know, really took an interest in me and wanted to get me more involved, which I was like, sure, great, okay. You know, I didn't really think about it as a great career move, and it really changed my life. He ended up moving on from Ingram and had a little gap, and then went to Inland. And so I ended up kind of almost immediately going up to chair, not almost immediately, but quicker than I was supposed to. So kind of got, you know, like we all do in this industry, kind of thrown in and just figure it out, and got me more comfortable with speaking to people I didn't know and asking them questions. Still not my favorite thing to do, but in public speaking and addressing a room and running a meeting and running a committee. And it's just so different than when you're managing a team. You know, there's a hierarchy there. It doesn't mean that they always do what you say, but when there's kind of clear lines. But when you're chair of an industry group with all different diverse voices, and people don't have to listen to you, you know, you need to make it worth their while to be there and to be involved. And so it was a really great lesson in how to really engage with people. So that was one of my, you know, that was my first big one and one of my favorite ones. And now the safety committees have grown so much and are so impactful and really integrated into the industry and the AWO organization, which I love. I guess GEICA is probably the next one, the Gulf Intercoastal Canal Association. That's an intimidating one because it's like 120 years old. So when I became chair of that, I was like, oh, I hope I don't mess this up, because like I don't want to be the one who ended this long, prestigious organization. But that was another one that I had a great mentor with, Tom Marion, Buffalo Marine. He was the chair while I was the vice chair, and he really taught me how to balance it all, because he was the chair of AWO at the time, and he was also GEICA chair. And we're like, this isn't going to work. And he did both and killed it. So I was like, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. And it was also a really good balance of a board in terms of people who have been there for a long time and new folks. And we kind of tried to keep that balance as we went. And that's just a great mix. So I guess my last one really is the Siemens Church Institute. I was extremely fortunate to join that board. That was one where I, again, feel way like, you know, in over my head, because there's some really heavy hitters on that board. Long time industry people, more of a blue water bent. again, interesting to me because it's not where most of my experience lies. And so that's my newest board. But it's really fascinating, and especially because it's all about the Mariner. So, and it's again, Teddy Roosevelt was like on the board. I mean, it was and involved. So again, it's really humbling to be joining this, 175-year organization, and really that has been supporting Mariner since day one that it started. So, and really expanded to the inland. Started off New York City indigent sailor support. Housing sailors when they came into port and providing dental care and medical care and all that. And now that providing state-of-the-art simulator training in Paducah. I mean, it's just a fascinating trajectory of this organization. So just kind of getting started with that one, but it's one of the most interesting groups out there, I think.
Well, before we conclude, do you have any, I've asked this question of many other guests, do you have any sort of message for the industry or for viewers that may not know much about it, that may have seen you somewhere?
Wow. That is a good question. I also have all these notes that I didn't look at the whole time. So I feel like I might have something in here. But I might actually leave. I have a message, but I might steal it from Merritt Lane, the president and CEO of Canal Barge, who had a lot of great quotes and quips that I wrote down over time. And I looked this one up before our call because I really liked it. And it's something that has kind of, since I heard it, kind of guided me. That I think it was really just off the cuff, and he was talking about when newer people join the organization, really what the three things that he's looking at are: how do they show up? Like, how do they act in meetings? How do they interact in the galley when they're getting coffee? How do they greet you? Do they pick up a piece of trash that they see on the floor or they walk by? How do they show up personally? Number two, are they, giving you positive surprises? I like that term because, it's one thing and a great thing to go in and do your job, but the curious people who are asking the questions or surprising you with something you didn't think about before, that's kind of what makes organizations better, is that diverse viewpoint and those surprises. And the third was they're good at listening to and learning from their colleagues, regardless of who. So if it's a new vice president who comes in with 50 years of experience, learning to and listening to the, person who has been there for only a year and new to the industry, and vice versa. And that's really what I think this podcast is all about, is us listening to each other and learning from each other. And it's only going to make us stronger as an industry because we're in it for the long haul, I think.
Well, I intend to be.
Me too. I appreciate your flexibility and letting me push back a little bit just because of time difference and stuff. I was like, I gotta figure this out. But do you like it so far?
As busy as you are, I'm very happy you allotted me this time this afternoon.
Oh, as whatever you need.
Mary, as these all have ended up to this point, I do appreciate your time, as I mentioned, very much. I know how busy you are. So I thank you very much again for your time, and we'll talk very soon.
Thank you, Tim, for the opportunity. This was a blast. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.